A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Fugitive Omega. The air in the Whispering Woods was thick with the scent of decay, a bitter perfume that clung to Lyra's fur and skin. It was the smell of the withering, a magical blight that was slowly but surely consuming the lichen lands. She could feel it in the fragile crunch of dead leaves beneath her worn boots, see it in the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks, and taste it in the dust-choked wind. Lyra was a ghost in this dying world, the sole survivor of the once proud Ashwood lineage, a remnant of a time when her family's connection to the land and its magic was a source of great power. Now that power was a forgotten whisper, and she, its last vessel, was a hunted fugitive with the lowest status imaginable, a mere omega. Her trauma was a physical weight she carried every day, a constant ache in her chest that rivaled the gnawing hunger. It had been years since the fall of her family and her subsequent rejection, but the memory was as fresh and searing as the brand on her neck. Her family, the Ashwoods, had been keepers of ancient knowledge, healers and peacemakers who held a delicate balance of power among the lichen packs. Their influence was respected, and their counsel sought by even the greatest alphas. But a kingdom-wide political purge, led by a ruthless monarch who saw any power outside of his own as a threat, had branded her family as traitors. The Ashwoods were hunted and slaughtered. Lyra, then a young woman, was the only one to escape the massacre, a fragile thread of her bloodline still clinging to life. It was at this moment, amidst the chaos and fear, that she was found by Alpha Lucian. Lucian was not the architect of her family's demise, but a product of the same brutal political climate. He was the alpha of her pack, and destiny had decreed that she was his fated mate. A mate bond, a silken thread of destiny that she had felt pulling her to him her entire life, had hummed with promise before the purge. She had believed that their bond would be her salvation, a safe harbor from the coming storm. But Lucian's ambition was colder and sharper than any blade. To ensure his pack's survival, and to prove his loyalty to the crown that had just decimated her family, he had to disavow the last Ashwood. He had to make a choice: protect his pack by sacrificing his mate, or face the fate that had befallen her lineage. He chose his pack. He had stood before the assembled packs, a king in all but name, and with a voice that carried through the terrified silence, he declared her a pariah. I, Alpha Lucian of the Silverwood Pack, reject Lyra, the last of the traitorous Ashwoods, as my mate, he had bellowed. The rejection was meant to be a ceremonial severing, a painful but bloodless act. But Lyra, fueled by a deep instinctual rage and sorrow for her lost family, had howled in defiance. In a fit of cold fury, Lucian had used his claws to score a brand across her neck, right where the mating bond would have blossomed, a brutal scar that symbolized not just rejection, but her fall to the status of Omega. With no family, no pack, and no status, she was cast into the lowest tier of lichen society. She became an Omega, a forgotten part of their world. She was cast out, and Lyra, barely clinging to her sanity, fled into the withering woods. The Alpha's rejection was a wound that never truly healed. It was a constant reminder that her kind, the peacekeepers and healers, were a relic, a soft, fragile part of their world that had been discarded in favor of brute strength and political power. The very laws of their supernatural world, the pack hierarchy, were built to keep her submissive and quiet. The Alphas commanded, the Betas enforced, and the Omegas were meant to be nothing more than a source of comfort and healing. But Lyra's healing power was different, deeper. Her lineage was said to have the ability to mend not just flesh, but the land itself. A forgotten truth, a fairy tale in the minds of a generation obsessed with dominance. For 4 long years, she had survived on her own, a ghost in the fading wilderness. She lived by her wits, avoiding the patrols of rogue wolves and keeping to the shadows. She knew the forest's secrets, where to find the last clean water, which berries would sustain her, and the best places to hide when the moon was full, and the wolves were out in force. Her magic was still dormant, a low thrum of unfulfilled potential deep within her. It was a power she didn't know how to wield, a gift that her ancestors had cherished, but that her peers now feared. The withering, however, was slowly sapping that strength, weakening her with every dying tree and every contaminated stream. She could feel the connection between her own life force and the land. A slow and agonizing drain. The incident that changed everything began with a sudden shift in the wind. Lyra, a creature of heightened senses, caught the metallic scent of armor and the earthy musk of well-fed wolves. Not the hungry, desperate rogues she was used to, but a pack with discipline and purpose. She ran, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was a skilled runner, but she was weakened by the withering. They cornered her in a ravine, their numbers overwhelming. They were not from the Silverwood pack. Their scent was different, unfamiliar, a mix of mountain air and cold steel. The alpha of this new group was not present, but his command was felt. The wolves circled her, their eyes cold and their intent clear. They were not there to kill, but to capture. They didn't see a person. They saw a resource. They saw the legends of the last Omega's healing power, the last desperate hope for a dying kingdom. A huge beta with scarred fur stepped forward, his voice a low growl of authority. The Alpha King has requested your presence. Do not resist. Lyra's blood ran cold. The Alpha King, a name whispered with fear and reverence, a figure of ultimate power. She was no longer just a fugitive from her old pack. She was a pawn in a game of empires. She fought, a desperate feral thing, her small frame no match for their strength. They subdued her with a net of thick leather, and as the ropes tightened, she felt the familiar knot of dread in her stomach. Her past was catching up to her, not in the form of the man who broke her, but in the hands of another alpha, a different king. As they led her away, a prisoner in her own land, she saw the grim, stoic faces of the guards. She was a tool, a solution to a problem. And in her heart, she knew that for every alpha, every king, her worth would always be measured not by her heart, but by the power they could extract from her. Chapter 2. The Alpha King's Demand. The air in the throne room was as thin and cold as the marble beneath Lyra's bare feet. It smelled of polished stone, aged parchment, and the musky, dominant scent of a powerful lichen. She was no longer surrounded by the damp rot of the forest, but by a chilling, sterile opulence that spoke of power and authority. Her worn tunic and the dirt still clinging to her skin felt like a public shaming. A dozen lichen guards stood silent and unmoving along the walls, their gazes like daggers, their postures a testament to the iron discipline of their pack. She felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach, a feeling she had known intimately since the day of her rejection. This alpha was different from Lucian in his outward appearance, but his intentions felt achingly the same. At the far end of the immense hall, seated upon a throne carved from a single piece of dark, ancient wood, was the Alpha King. He was a figure of formidable power, a man in his prime, with dark hair cut short and a face carved from stone, all sharp angles and a jawline set with grim resolve. His eyes, a shade of molten gold, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her wolf whimper in her chest. His presence was not just felt, but pressed upon the very air she breathed, a silent command that demanded absolute deference. He didn't see a woman, a person who had suffered. He saw a solution, a tool. The weight of his scrutiny was a physical pressure, a constant reminder of her helplessness. She stood there, a small, defiant figure in the vast, imposing hall, the last of the Ashwoods, a name once synonymous with power, now a mere Omega. The contrast between her and the grandeur of the throne room was a deliberate and cruel act of dominance. You are the last of the Ashwoods. The Alpha King's voice was a low, resonant rumble that echoed in the vast space, devoid of warmth or empathy. The one with the Omega blood that can supposedly end this blight. He spoke the word Omega, like an insult, a curse. His tone was dismissive, as if speaking of an object rather than a sentient being. My scholars say your lineage holds the key to the withering. They say your blood, your ancient magic, is the only cure. He motioned to a scroll on a table beside his throne, a document of his own making, his own self-serving truth. They claim your family's connection to the land is a magic that can reverse the blight. I do not believe in old tales, but I am desperate. So, here you are, Omega. Lyra's chin lifted defiantly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Fear warred with a fierce, burning anger. She was tired of being a legend, a myth, a pawn in the games of powerful men. "My family's power died with them," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She met his gaze, refusing to be cowed. "The withering is a punishment for alphas who forget the old ways, who tear down ancient houses for their own selfish gain. Perhaps it is a curse you cannot undo with brute force or with a scapegoat. The true healers are gone, and you stand on the ruins of their betrayal, demanding their secrets from me, their sole survivor." A ripple of shock went through the guards. No one spoke to the Alpha King that way. His golden eyes narrowed to slits, and a dangerous growl rumbled deep in his chest. "You will not speak to me of punishment, girl," Thane said, his voice dropping to a low, perilous hiss. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of his anger. "You are a prisoner brought here for a purpose. You will tell me what you know, and you will cooperate." He rose from his throne, his immense height casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the room. The scent of his dominance intensified, a crushing weight that threatened to force Lyra to her knees. This was his alpha command, a power that all Lycans were instinctively wired to obey. And yet, Lyra resisted. She forced her back to straighten, her gaze to meet his. Her blood burned with a defiance that was a legacy of her fallen family. She would not be broken again. She had survived the loss of her family, the humiliation of rejection, the lonely years in the forest. She would not bow to a new master. "My knowledge is not yours to command," she spat, the words a desperate act of defiance. "Your power means nothing to me. Your pack laws mean nothing to me. I am an Omega with no pack. You have no authority over me." The Alpha King took a step forward, his eyes flashing with fury. He was not used to being disobeyed. And then, a moment that shattered all of her prepared defenses. As he drew nearer, a sudden blinding sensation ripped through her. It was not a physical pain, but a spiritual one. A shockwave of recognition that pulsed through her very soul. The air shimmered between them, a tangible force of energy. It was the mate bond, an unmistakable pull of destiny that sang a song she had only heard once before. With Lucian, her body, her wolf, screamed at her to go to him, to submit to his power, to find refuge in his strength. But her mind, scarred and traumatized, recoiled in horror. It was a cruel cosmic joke, a monstrous twist of fate. A mate, another alpha, after everything. And he, too, was a king. Thane stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. His face, once a mask of cold fury, was now a portrait of confusion and furious denial. He felt it too. The scent of her, the scent of his mate, flooded his senses, an unexpected warmth in the cold, sterile hall. He reeled, taking a step back, as if burned by her mere presence. The Omega, the solution, the last of a traitorous line, was his fated mate. The complication he had so feared was 1,000 times worse than he could have ever imagined. The bond pulsed between them, an invisible chain that threatened to unravel all his plans. He had to save his kingdom, his pack, his dying brother. He could not, would not, be weakened by this bond, this fate. He took a deep breath, fighting against the powerful pull that threatened to compromise his resolve. Lyra's wolf, desperate for the connection, yearned to go to him. But her consciousness screamed in protest, remembering the raw ache of a bond severed, of a heart shattered. The scar on her neck burned with a phantom pain, a warning. She would not be a pawn again. She would not trust an alpha, a king, a man who saw her as a means to an end, a curse or a salvation. He regained his composure, his face once again an unyielding mask of stone. But his eyes, those golden eyes, held a flicker of something she had never seen before. A fear that mirrored her own, a fear of the bond. "You will cooperate," he said again, his voice lower and more dangerous than before, the sound of a man trying to regain control. "Mate or not, you will save my kingdom. That is my command." The words were an order, a rejection of their destiny, a clear signal that to him, the kingdom came before her, just as it had for Lucian. Lyra's heart shattered all over again. Chapter 3. Beneath the king's armor. The gilded cage was a stark and silent prison. Lyra's new quarters in the Alpha King's fortress were luxurious beyond her wildest imagination. A plush feather mattress, tapestries of rich crimson depicting scenes of lichen battles and ancient hunts, and a hearth that kept the biting cold at bay. Yet, the air was heavy with the weight of her captivity. 2 guards, stoic and unwavering, stood sentinel outside her door at all times, their presence a constant reminder that she was not a guest, but a possession. She saw their suspicion in every glance they cast her way, in the way they handed her meals without meeting her eyes. They did not see the Omega, the outcast. They saw a last resort, a potential cure for the blight that was slowly stealing their world. They saw a sorceress, a thing of dark magic, a person to be watched and distrusted. Lyra, with a heavy heart, felt a profound loneliness that even the Whispering Woods had never inflicted. There, at least, she was free. Here, she was a rare bird trapped in a cage, expected to sing a song she didn't know how to sing. The days passed in a blur of frustration and silent observation. The king's healers, ancient wolves with weary eyes, and a knowledge born of centuries of tradition, would visit her. They were well-meaning, but misguided. They tried to extract her power as if it were a potion, a physical substance to be siphoned from her veins. They would present her with flasks and vials, demanding that she produce her healing magic for them to study. They did not understand that her power was not a resource to be harvested, but an intrinsic part of her being, a connection to the world around her, to the very life force of the earth. Lyra knew they would fail, because they were seeking a physical solution to a magical wound. Her refusal was not an act of malice, but a simple truth. She couldn't do what they asked. Her refusal only solidified her image in their minds as a stubborn, perhaps even malevolent witch, holding her secrets close in a time of great need. The whispers followed her, an unseen chorus of a pack that saw her as the final hurdle to their salvation. Her defiance, however, was not total. During her supervised walks through the fortress's stone corridors and vast courtyards, she couldn't help but notice the signs of the withering's insidious creep. It was not just the land outside that suffered. The sickness had permeated the very walls of the kingdom. She saw it in the pale skin of the pups, in the coughing fits of the elderly, in the growing despair in the eyes of the warriors who returned from patrol with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The sight stirred something deep within her, a dormant instinct of her Ashwood lineage. Her ancestors had been healers, their purpose to mend the broken, to bring life where there was none. She felt an uncontrollable pull to help, a desire that transcended her own pain and fear. One afternoon she passed the infirmary and saw a young boy, a pup, no older than 6, struggling to breathe. His small chest racked with a fever that burned like a fire. His mother, a beta guard, held his hand, her face a mask of silent grief that Lyra knew all too well. It was a familiar ache, the same one she felt for the dying trees in the forest, the same one that had driven her ancestors to heal. Without a word, she slipped away from her guard, drawing on a subtle, unseen magic. She moved with an innate grace, a fluidity that betrayed the years of hardship she had endured. From a small, neglected garden in the courtyard, a place of withered roses and dying herbs, she gathered a handful of the last remaining belladonna and poppies. She crushed them with her own hands in a small stone bowl she found in the garden, her fingers moving with a forgotten, instinctive rhythm, mixing them with a paste of river mud. It was a simple remedy, a balm to soothe a fever, to ease a pain, not to cure the entire blight. She returned to the infirmary, and without seeking permission, knelt by the boy's bedside. She laid the paste on his forehead, her touch light and full of a power she had never consciously harnessed, a subtle energy that flowed from her into him. It was an act of pure, selfless compassion, a stark contrast to the political machinations that had led to her capture. The beta guard, stunned into silence by her action, could only watch as the heat radiating from the boy's skin subsided almost instantly, and a peaceful silence settled over the small room as he finally drifted into a much-needed slumber. Her healing was not a grand display, but a quiet, powerful grace. The news of Lyra's small miracle reached the Alpha King. Thane, who had been brooding in his study, contemplating his next move, was intrigued. The healers had failed, the scholars were at a loss, and yet the Omega had succeeded with a simple touch. He dismissed the guards and sought her out, finding her later, not in her room, but in the infirmary, tending to the boy's mother, offering her a soothing tea she had brewed from the withered herbs. Her face, usually a mask of stoic defiance, was softened with empathy. Her golden brown eyes alight with a kindness that seemed to contradict everything he had been told about the last Ashwood. It was in that moment that Thane saw something more than a tool. He saw a person. He dismissed the guards and stood over her, his presence no longer an overbearing command, but a quiet, heavy question. "Why?" he asked, his voice low, his golden eyes searching hers for a truth he couldn't find in her files. "Why help them? After everything we've done to you? After my pack took you from your home? Why would you show such kindness?" Lyra looked at him, her gaze unwavering. She saw the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, the weight of a kingdom on his broad shoulders. "You asked me to save your kingdom," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But a kingdom is not just a throne or a fortress. It is its people. My family taught me that true power lies in healing, not in conquering. The blight is a wound on all of us, on the land and on our hearts. And so, I will heal what I can, one person at a time. It is who I am." Her words hit him with the force of a blow. He saw the truth in her eyes, the genuine compassion that belied her low status. It was in that moment that he began to see beyond his own grief and desperation. He lowered his gaze, his voice a hoarse whisper, heavy with the burden he had carried alone for so long. "The blight is not just an external threat," he confessed, the words a bitter confession. "It has been in my own family for generations. My father, the previous king, succumbed to it. And now, it is slowly killing my younger brother, my only sibling, the heir to my throne. He is not strong enough to fight it. That is why I am so desperate. That is why I will do anything. He is all I have left." Lyra's heart broke for him. The cold, ruthless Alpha King was a man haunted by grief and the fear of losing his family, just as she had. The mate bond that had been a monstrous source of discord now pulsed with a new kind of energy. Empathy. It was no longer just an irresistible physical pull, but a profound emotional connection, a shared understanding of loss and fear. In that moment, Lyra saw the man beneath the crown, the brother beneath the king. She saw the loneliness he carried, and the fear that gnawed at his soul. And for the first time since her family's fall, she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, this time, her destiny would not be one of betrayal and pain, but of a shared purpose. Their bond had just deepened from a curse into a fragile, unspoken alliance built on a shared, agonizing pain. Chapter 4. The Unspoken Promise. The fragile alliance forged in the infirmary deepened with each passing day. Thane, no longer treating Lyra as a mere tool, began to seek her out with a quiet but undeniable purpose. He would come to her quarters, dismissing the guards with a curt nod, and sit across from her, the immense space between them now feeling less like a chasm and more like a bridge they were both too afraid to cross. He spoke of the kingdom's struggles, the political pressures, and the rising desperation of his pack. He spoke of the treaties he had to sign, the alphas he had to placate, and the ever-present threat of rogue packs at the borders. Lyra, in turn, spoke of the land. She taught him to read the signs of the withering, not just in the pale faces of the sick, but in the brittle grass outside the castle walls, in the stagnant water of the moat, and in the silence of the birds. She showed him how the withering was not an isolated disease, but a creeping rot that started from the heart of the land itself. She explained how her family, the Ashwoods, had not been warriors or conquerors, but tenders of life. They were the gardeners of the realm, and their strength lay not in violence but in patience and compassion. The tension between them was a palpable, living thing, a low hum of energy that filled every room they were in. It was a silent acknowledgement of the mate bond, a powerful magnetic pull that neither of them dared to speak of, a storm of repressed desire and fear. He saw her defiance not as insolence, but as a deep-seated strength born of unimaginable loss. He began to respect her, not for the power he hoped to extract, but for the resilience he saw in her every action. She, in turn, saw his cold exterior not as cruelty, but as the armor of a man carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. They were two broken halves of a whole, two sides of a coin, a king burdened by his duty, and an Omega scarred by her past. The pull was irresistible, a force of nature that transcended their personal traumas and their opposing worlds. It manifested in stolen glances across a crowded hall, in the way his hand would linger a moment too long when he passed her a scroll or a map of the dying territories, in the way she would subtly lean into his presence, drawn to his warmth like a moth to a flame. The air would thicken whenever they were alone, charged with an unspoken need that made every breath a conscious effort. One evening, he brought her a new set of clothes, not the luxurious gowns of a Luna, but practical tunics and leggings made of soft, dark linen, clothes that a healer would wear. It was a quiet gesture, a small act of kindness that spoke volumes. "It is not for a queen," he said, his voice a low rumble, his golden eyes searching hers. "It is for you, so you can move freely, so you don't feel like a prisoner." His gaze was soft with an unspoken apology for her captivity, for the way he had once treated her. Lyra's heart fluttered. She saw in that moment that his motivations were not just for the good of the pack, but were becoming personal. She was no longer just a means to an end. She was becoming a person to him, a partner in his struggle. She began to understand his relentless drive was not born of simple power lust, but of a deep, paternalistic duty to his pack, and more importantly, to his brother. He would do anything to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness, his own desires. His sense of responsibility was both his greatest strength and his most profound weakness. Just as a fragile trust began to blossom between them, the external obstacles started to manifest with a vengeance. A powerful beta named Seraphina, who had long harbored ambitions of becoming Thane's Luna, arrived at the fortress. She was a stunning lycaness with a cunning mind and a pack of her own, a political match of immense value. Her golden fur and sharp, calculating eyes made her a formidable rival, a woman who understood power in a way Lyra, the Omega, never could. Seraphina saw Lyra for what she was, a threat. She did not see a cursed Omega. She saw the mate bond, a spiritual tether that could disrupt all of her plans. Seraphina began to spread whispers among the guards and the court. She accused Lyra of being a witch, a bringer of the withering, and not its cure. She pointed out the scar on Lyra's neck as proof of her unworthiness and her demonic pacts, and she used every opportunity to undermine Lyra's budding influence in the court, painting her as a manipulative interloper who was taking advantage of the Alpha King's desperation. She was a master of political theater, a woman who understood that the hearts and minds of a pack could be swayed by fear as easily as by loyalty. Thane, caught between his duty and his deepening feelings for Lyra, grew tense. He knew Seraphina's motives and her power, and to dismiss her was to risk a political war he couldn't afford. But to allow her to continue her verbal assault on Lyra was to betray the trust he had so carefully built. The court, divided, watched with bated breath, witnessing the unspoken battle for the king's heart and the kingdom's future. The pack's law was clear. The king should mate with the strongest, the most politically advantageous partner. An Omega, a member of a fallen lineage, was not a choice. She was a liability. The whispers of the court, the subtle glances of the guards, all served as a constant reminder that their bond was an aberration, a danger to the very kingdom they were trying to save. The pressure came to a head one night when Lyra, unable to sleep, found Thane in the ancient castle library, studying the very scrolls that spoke of her lineage. The room was dark, lit only by a single candle that cast long, dancing shadows. He looked exhausted, the weight of his crown heavy on his brow. She walked up to him, a silent, comforting presence. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a raw vulnerability she had never seen before. He was not the Alpha King, but a man at his breaking point. "They say she is the better choice," he said, his voice a low whisper, referring to Seraphina. "They say I am risking everything for a myth, for a lie about an Omega who can heal the world." Lyra reached out, her hand hovering over his arm, a gesture of comfort. She felt the powerful muscles beneath the thin fabric of his tunic, the heat of his skin. The touch was a jolt, a silent acknowledgement of the desire that had been simmering between them. "What do you say?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in his eyes she saw her own reflection, but with a clarity she had never seen before. He saw not a tool, not a myth, not a prisoner, but his mate. The last vestiges of his resistance crumbled. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. The mate bond surged between them, a torrent of powerful emotions, and for the first time, it was not a shockwave of pain, but a wave of profound peace. He leaned in, his lips finding hers in the dim light of the candle. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation, a silent declaration, a promise of a future they were both too afraid to imagine, but too destined to ignore. It was their first moment of intimacy, a quiet rebellion against a world that demanded their separation, a testament to a bond that was stronger than any pack law. The kiss was a silent answer to all of her questions, all of his doubts. It was the moment they stopped fighting fate, and finally, for the first time, started to embrace it. Chapter 5. The King's Despair. The air in the king's private library was no longer heavy with silent tension, but with the palpable energy of a shared quest. Lyra and Thane, their movements now a silent, synchronized dance, spent their days poring over ancient texts and brittle scrolls, their hands and minds working in tandem. The mate bond, once a source of bitter conflict, was now a low hum of connection that guided their every move, an unspoken promise in a world of uncertainty. It was the foundation of a trust that had been built on shared pain and a desperate hope for a future they were both too afraid to fully claim. One cold afternoon, while sifting through a forgotten cabinet behind a crumbling tapestry that depicted a forgotten war, they discovered a hidden chamber. Lyra, her senses finely tuned to the subtle magic of the castle, had felt a faint tremor of ancient power emanating from the wall. The chamber was a place untouched by time, smelling of dust, dried herbs, and forgotten magic. Ancient stone tablets and glyphs lined the walls, each one a testament to a truth long buried. This was no ordinary storage room. It was a sanctuary of the old ways, a place of historical truth. Together, they painstakingly translated the faded carvings. The story was of a great king who, centuries ago, had betrayed his Omega mate for political power. His ambition was a mirror of the very disease that now plagued his line. In her anguish, the Omega did not die. She became a powerful witch, a being of immense magical capability, her sorrow transforming into a wellspring of potent, dark magic. Her name was Dahlia. The text described her grief and rage, and how she wove a curse into the very fabric of the kingdom, a blight that would slowly consume the land and its people, affecting the most powerful bloodlines first, a perpetual punishment for the Alpha's betrayal. The curse was an eternal reminder that the bond between an Alpha and an Omega was sacred, and that to break it for selfish gain was to invite ruin. The curse could only be broken by the union of an Alpha and an Omega who found each other not through a political arrangement, but through true, unwavering love. It was a curse that fed on broken bonds and shattered hearts, a cycle of cosmic justice that had been passed down through the generations. The withering was not a simple disease. It was a manifestation of a powerful witch's grief, and the only cure was an unbreakable bond of loyalty and love. Lyra's breath hitched in her throat as she traced the name Dahlia with a trembling finger. The revelation was a stunning blow, a confluence of history, destiny, and her own tragic past. It meant her Omega lineage and her healing powers were the key, but it also meant that Thane's kingdom was suffering because of a cosmic injustice that mirrored her own trauma. A king had betrayed his Omega, and the kingdom had paid the price. Thane, reading the translation over her shoulder, felt a profound shame. The truth of the curse was a devastating blow to his pride. to the very foundation of his kingship. His ancestors had been cursed not by an enemy, but by their own hubris. He looked at Lyra, seeing the ghost of the wronged Omega, the vengeful witch Dahlia in her eyes, and the mate bond pulsed between them with a newfound urgency, a desperate need to prove they were different. He reached out and gently took her hand, a silent promise to break the cycle, but their moment of revelation was cut tragically short. Seraphina, the ambitious beta who had been watching their movements with cold, calculating eyes, found a new weapon in her war for the throne. She had observed their frantic search, and when she learned of the ancient chamber, she made her move. She broke into the king's infirmary, where his brother, the young prince, lay, a fragile boy wasting away under the blight. She placed a small, dark object, a talisman Lyra had discarded in a moment of frustration, convinced it held no power, near the boy's bedside. It was a simple trick, but one that would have devastating consequences. She then raced to the council, her face a mask of feigned horror and righteous indignation. She pointed to the witchcraft in the chamber and the worsening condition of the prince, weaving a tale of a vengeful Omega who had used her dark magic to poison the king's heir and curse the kingdom. She painted Lyra as a dangerous sorceress who could not be trusted, her Omega status a cover for a malevolent heart. Her words were venom, and they found fertile ground in the fear and suspicion of a desperate court. Before Thane could even begin to process Seraphina's treacherous words, a new, more immediate horror erupted. A piercing horn, a sound of battle and aggression, echoed from the outer walls of the fortress. It was Lucian, Lyra's former alpha. He had heard whispers of the last Ashwood at the king's court, and had come to claim her, not out of love, but out of a ferocious, possessive rage. He wanted her power for himself, a prize to be won in a game of brute force. The battle was swift and brutal. Lucian's pack, a horde of desperate, half-starved wolves from the blighted lands, crashed against the fortress gates like a tidal wave of fury. The air filled with the growls of warring shifters, the clang of steel on steel, and the desperate cries of the pack members. The sound of destruction was a horrifying symphony, a chaotic prelude to a deeper, more personal tragedy. Thane, his mind reeling from the revelations and Seraphina's lies, was torn. His brother was dying, a civil war was brewing in his court, and his kingdom was under attack. Lucian's forces, a tidal wave of fury, breached the outer wall, and Thane, with his heart in his throat, had to make a terrible choice. His alpha instinct screamed at him to defend his pack, to protect his inner circle, to save his brother. He ordered his men to defend the inner keep, to protect the throne. While he rushed to the infirmary to check on his brother, he told his guards to bring Lyra to the safety of the keep, to protect her above all else. His last command an act of love and desperation. But in the chaos, Seraphina's forces intercepted her, and as she was being led away, Lucian's warriors, a sea of snarling faces, cornered her in a collapsing corridor. Lucian, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face, stood before her. "The king's mate, is it?" he sneered, his wolf's eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "I think not. The Omega belongs to me." Lyra, seeing Lucian's cruel smile, turned back, desperate for Thane to save her. She saw him, just for a moment, in the distance, standing in the crumbling courtyard, torn. He was looking at his dying kingdom, at his brother, and then at her. In that fraction of a second, that moment of agonizing hesitation, Lyra's heart shattered all over again. The pain was more profound than the first rejection. It was the crushing realization that history was repeating itself. The mate bond, which had felt so strong, so promising, suddenly snapped, a phantom pain ripping through her, a cruel echo of her first betrayal. Thane, too, felt the agonizing tear of the bond. He watched in horror as Lucian's men dragged Lyra away, her last desperate cry fading into the roar of battle. He had hesitated. He had been so focused on his duty, on his brother, on his kingdom, that he had, for a fleeting moment, chosen it over her. And in that moment, he lost everything. His kingdom was burning. His brother was dying. And the only hope he had to save them, the woman he was beginning to love, was gone. He was left alone in the heart of his crumbling kingdom. A king without a queen. A mate without a mate. A man consumed by a despair deeper than any curse. His world, his love, and his hope had just been ripped away, and all he had left was the bitter taste of his own failure. Chapter 6. The Phoenix of Ashwood. The fortress was a cacophony of carnage, but for Lyra the world had narrowed to a single horrifying point. Lucian's face. He was no longer the conflicted alpha she had known, but a monster of pure, unadulterated malice, his wolf's eyes gleaming with a possessive fire. His pack, a desperate and hungry mob, held her in a vice-like grip, dragging her through the collapsing corridors of the fortress, their growls a menacing soundtrack to her own spiraling despair. The last image of Thane, standing torn and indecisive, was a wound that bled a deeper pain than any physical injury. The mate bond, which had begun to feel like a tether of hope, had been brutally severed, leaving a hollow, aching void in her soul. History had repeated itself. The love she had dared to believe in had been, once again, sacrificed for duty. Lucian stopped in a grand hall, a place of broken statues and shattered windows, a testament to the brutal assault. He threw her to the ground with a cruel laugh. "Look at you," he sneered, circling her like a vulture. "The Alpha King's little Omega, the one they say can save the kingdom. How pathetic. You were always just a pretty story, a myth. Now you are mine." His words were a physical assault, a reminder of her powerlessness. His pack surrounded them, a circle of snarling, hungry wolves. She was a prize to be won, a tool to be used, and a trophy to be paraded. Lyra felt a surge of ancient feral rage. This was the man who had torn her family apart, who had branded her with his cruelty, who had stolen her future. He was a symbol of everything that had been taken from her. The betrayal was a fire in her blood, and for the first time, it was not a pain she wanted to endure, but a power she wanted to unleash. A low, guttural growl rose from her throat, a sound she didn't recognize. It was not the whimper of a victim, but the roar of a primal force. The scar on her neck, the mark of Lucian's rejection, began to burn with a white-hot intensity. The pain was excruciating, but it was a different kind of pain, not one of loss, but of awakening. The magic of her Ashwood lineage, dormant for centuries, began to stir. It was a wellspring of life, of power, of unyielding will. The air around her began to thrum with a subtle electric energy. The guards recoiled, their eyes wide with fear. They had expected an Omega, a fragile thing to be broken. They had not expected this. "What is this?" Lucian's voice was a snarl of confusion and rage. "What are you doing, Omega?" Lyra, her eyes now glowing with an ethereal golden light, slowly rose to her feet. "I am not your Omega," she said, her voice an echo of 1,000 ancient whispers. "I am not a tool. I am not a myth. I am Lyra, the last of the Ashwood line, and I am the curse breaker." The air crackled with a powerful, raw magic. She raised her hands, and the very ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Her healing power, once a gentle, nurturing force, was now a weapon. She drew the energy of the dying earth, of the withering itself, and turned it against her enemies. Vines, thick and thorny, erupted from the stone floor, wrapping around the legs of Lucian's men. The shattered statues in the hall began to crumble and reform, their stone dust swirling into a defensive vortex. She was not just a healer, she was a conduit, a vessel for the power of the land itself. The Ashwood magic, so long dormant, had awakened in a furious, protective blaze. Just as she was holding them at bay, Thane burst into the hall, his golden wolf form a blur of speed and rage. He had seen the fires, he had heard the screams, and he had felt the sickening snap of the mate bond. The realization of his mistake, the agonizing weight of his hesitation, had fueled a despair so profound it had been forged into a weapon. He didn't come to defend his throne or his kingdom. He came for her. His heart was a furious drum in his chest, a desperate pulse of a love he had fought so long to deny. He saw Lyra, a figure of radiant, terrifying power, and he knew in that moment that she was not the curse, but the cure. Lucian, enraged by Lyra's defiance, lunged at her, his claws extended, aiming for her throat. But Thane, with a guttural roar that shook the very foundations of the hall, intercepted him. It was a clash of titans, two alphas locked in a furious deathmatch, one fighting for a stolen prize, the other for a love he had almost lost forever. Lucian was faster, a cunning warrior driven by greed. But Thane was stronger, fueled by a desperation that was 1,000 times more potent than ambition. He fought not with his mind, but with his soul. In the midst of the battle, Lucian, with a swift, malicious move, managed to land a crippling blow. He plunged his claws deep into Thane's side, and the Alpha King roared in pain, his body falling to the ground, blood seeping into the cold stone floor. Lucian turned his back on the fallen king, a triumphant smirk on his face, and lunged at Lyra, who was still holding his men at bay with her magic. He had won. He had defeated the king, and now the Omega, his prize, was within his grasp. But then, an act of supreme, selfless love. As Lucian's claws closed in on Lyra, Thane, bleeding and broken, lunged forward with a final desperate burst of strength. He threw himself between her and Lucian, his body a shield, taking the full force of the blow. Lucian's claws, meant to tear at her, plunged deep into Thane's back. Lyra watched in horror, the mate bond, which had been broken a moment before, suddenly igniting with a searing, agonizing fire. It was not a physical pain, but the spiritual shockwave of a love so profound, a sacrifice so pure that it shattered the very laws of their world. The act of true, selfless love broke the curse. The scar on Lyra's neck, the symbol of her rejection, flared with a brilliant white light. The ancient curse, the magic of the witch Dahlia, began to unravel. The withering, which had been slowly consuming the kingdom, was lifted. The stone statues in the hall began to bloom with life, their marble skins transforming into living plants. The dying flora outside the fortress walls, the brittle grass, the skeletal trees, all began to regenerate, their colors returning with a sudden, impossible vibrancy. The alpha who had rejected his mate for power had caused the curse. The alpha who had sacrificed his life for his mate, for love, had broken it. Lucian, confused and weakened, shrieked in terror as the magic he had sought to control turned on him, the thorny vines now tightening around his limbs, the very ground he stood on turning against him. He was no match for the raw power of the Cursebreaker. Lyra, her eyes now a compassionate but firm gold, turned to him. She didn't have to fight him anymore. The curse had done its work. The last thing she saw was his body, writhing and screaming, consumed by the very magic he had sought to steal. She knelt by Thane's side, her mate, her king, the man who had given his life for her. His breathing was shallow, his body limp. The mate bond, now a river of powerful, healing energy, coursed between them, and with tears in her eyes, she whispered his name, a desperate prayer in the silent, blossoming hall. His sacrifice had saved them all. But at what cost? The curse was broken. But was he? Chapter 7. The Mating Mark. The silence that fell upon the grand hall was a heavy, sacred thing, a stark contrast to the cacophony of battle that had just concluded. The air, once thick with the scent of fear, dust, and blood, now carried the intoxicating perfume of newly blossomed flowers and rich, fertile earth. Life, in its most vibrant and powerful form, was reclaiming the space. Lyra knelt beside Thane's prone body, her hands hovering over his grievous wounds. The mate bond, which had just ignited with a furious, life-giving light, now pulsed between them like a steady heartbeat, a river of powerful, healing energy that flowed from her heart directly to his. She was no longer just the last of the Ashwood lineage. She was the living heart of the kingdom, the physical manifestation of the Cursebreaker, a radiant force of nature in human form. With tears streaming down her face, tears of both grief and profound relief, she began to pour her magic into him. It was a power she had never truly understood, a force that had been a low hum of unfulfilled potential for years, a whisper in the back of her mind. Now, it was a torrent, a wellspring of life that flowed from her fingertips into his broken flesh. She saw the deep gashes left by Lucian's claws begin to knit themselves together, the raw, torn muscle and skin sealing with an impossible speed. The life force she poured into him was her own, a dangerous act of self-sacrifice. But she did not hesitate. The mate bond was a two-way street. His sacrifice for her had ignited her power, and her power now was what would save him. She leaned down, her face close to his, and whispered his name, a litany of love, a desperate prayer that was also a promise. Thane, I won't lose you. Not now. Not after you chose me. Thane's golden eyes, which had been glassy with the glaze of death, flickered open. He looked at her, his gaze clear and filled with an awe that transcended his physical pain. He saw not just his mate, but the true queen of his heart, a woman of impossible power and unwavering love. He saw the fire in her eyes, the life she was giving him, and he felt a wave of profound, humbling gratitude. He reached a shaking hand to her cheek, his fingers tracing the faint, shimmering symbol that had replaced Lucian's brand on her neck. It was the mark of her true power, the mark of the curse breaker, a radiant emblem of her destiny. With a groan of pain, a sound more of relief than agony, he sat up, his wounds now only faded scars, a testament to her healing. The final, definitive defeat of the external obstacles was at hand. Lucian, the defeated alpha, lay on the floor, his body ensnared by the very magic Lyra had unleashed. The thorny vines, an extension of her will, were a prison of living wood, a poetic justice for the man who had torn her world apart. His howls of rage and frustration were silenced by the tightening vines, a final fitting end for his cruelty. Seraphina, the jealous beta, and her loyalists, who had been hiding in the shadows, emerged to see the Alpha King rise and the Omega's undeniable display of power. Their faces, once filled with arrogance and ambition, were now pale with fear. They had believed their treachery was a means to an end, a path to power. But the sight of Lyra's magic, the healing of the king, and the blossoming life in the hall proved them wrong. Their whispers of witchcraft and ill intent were silenced by the irrefutable truth of what they had witnessed. They had no recourse. Their lies were transparent. Their ambitions were hollow. They were nothing more than a defeated faction, and their surrender was swift and absolute. Thane, now standing tall, his power fully restored, turned to his pack. He was not a king returning to his throne, but a mate returning to his purpose. He held Lyra's hand, their fingers intertwined, the mate bond a tangible golden thread between them, a beacon of hope for all to see. Lucian's pack has been defeated, he announced, his voice a low, commanding rumble that carried through the still reverberating hall. Seraphina and her loyalists have surrendered. The withering, a curse born of a king's betrayal, has been broken by an alpha's love and an omega's sacrifice. We are no longer a pack of wolves ruled by fear. We are a family, a kingdom, guided by honor and love. His golden eyes, filled with a love that was a testament to his own transformation, settled on Lyra. My love for Lyra, the last of the Ashwood lineage, is not a weakness, but the source of our salvation. She is not a tool to be used, but a queen to be cherished. She is the true Luna of this kingdom. The ceremonial claiming, the final ritual of the mate bond, was not a public display of dominance, but a private, sacred moment between them, witnessed only by the ancient walls of the hall that had just been witness to their love and sacrifice. Thane led her to the center of the hall, where a patch of vibrant new grass had sprung from the stone floor. He knelt before her, an act of humble reverence, and with his eyes locked on hers, he spoke the words of the mate bond, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to his soulmate. With this pack as my witness, and with the ancestors as our guides, I, Alpha King Thane, accept you, Lyra, as my fated mate, my Omega, my Luna. I give you my heart, my soul, my pack, my kingdom. I will cherish you, protect you, and love you for all of my days." He then, with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, leaned forward and placed a gentle, possessive mark on her neck, just below the scar. It was not a brand of ownership, but a symbol of their unity, a sacred mark of their unbreakable bond. The scar of rejection, once a symbol of her pain, was now a backdrop for a mark of love, a testament to her past, but a promise for her future. Lyra, her heart overflowing with a love she had never thought possible, knelt and mirrored his words. "And I, Lyra of the Ashwoods, accept you, Thane, as my fated mate, my Alpha King. I give you my heart, my soul, my power. I will stand by you, heal you, and love you for all of my days." She sealed the bond with a kiss that was a promise of a new era, a new reality. With the bond complete, her power awakened even further. The raw energy of the land, the power of her Ashwood lineage, flowed through her freely. She felt the pulse of the earth, the rhythm of the life around her. She was no longer just a healer. She was a steward of the land, a living embodiment of the magic that had just saved them all. The transformation was complete. The outcast Omega, the last of her line, had been reclaimed, not just as a Luna, but as the true, powerful queen of the Lycan kingdom. Her destiny finally fulfilled. They were now one, their souls and their purpose intertwined forever, ready to lead their people into a future free of the curse. Chapter 8. A New Dawn. The withering was no more. The curse, a legacy of betrayal and sorrow, had been broken by an act of true love. The kingdom, once shrouded in a perpetual twilight of decay, was now bathed in the brilliant, life-giving light of a new dawn. The fortress, scarred by the recent battle, was not a place of mourning, but a monument to their resilience. Where stone had been broken, new vines of a vibrant green grew, their leaves unfurling in a silent testament to the queen's power. The air, once heavy with the scent of death, was now fragrant with the aroma of blooming jasmine and wet earth. The pack, defeated and broken by years of fear and desperation, was now united under a single, powerful, and merciful leadership. Alpha King Thane and Luna Lyra. Thane's recovery was nothing short of a miracle, a living testament to the power of their bond. The deep wounds Lucian had inflicted were now mere whispers on his skin, a stark reminder of the sacrifice he had made. He was no longer the cold, ruthless king who had seen the world in terms of power and politics. He was a king who had been brought to his knees by love, a man who had chosen his mate over his kingdom, and in doing so, had saved them both. His golden eyes, once so guarded and distant, now held a warmth and a depth that had been absent before. He ruled with a new kind of authority, one born not of fear, but of a fierce, protective love for his pack and for his Luna. The lessons of Lyra's Ashwood lineage, of healing and nurturing, were now the very foundation of his rule. The political machinations of Seraphina and the brutal savagery of Lucian were a part of a past they were destined to overcome. Lyra's transformation was even more profound. The fragile Omega, the outcast and the fugitive, was gone, replaced by a queen of grace, power, and unwavering resolve. Her connection to the land was no longer a dormant, whispered magic, but a conscious, vital force that flowed through her. She would walk through the castle courtyards, and plants would bloom at her feet. She would stand in the great hall, and the air would feel fresher, cleaner, as if the very space was breathing with her. Her past, once a source of deep shame and trauma, was finally healed. The scar on her neck, Lucian's brand of rejection, no longer felt like a wound. It was a symbol of her strength, a testament to her journey. It was a reminder that she had survived, that she had been broken and remade, not by a man's cruelty, but by her own inherent power. It was her history, a mark that proved she was not a victim, but a survivor, a queen who had risen from the ashes of her own destruction. Their rule was an intertwined tapestry of their individual strengths. Thane, the mighty Alpha, led with a commanding presence and an unwavering sense of justice. Lyra, the powerful Luna, ruled with a gentle hand, a nurturing spirit, and a wisdom that came from a deep connection to the life force of the world. He was the sword. She was the shield. He was the strength. She was the grace. Their decisions were made together, their hearts beating in a single rhythm, their wolves intertwined in a perfect, harmonious balance. The kingdom, in turn, began to flourish. The fields that had been barren for years became fertile once more. The streams and rivers, once stagnant and poisoned by the withering, now flowed with crystal-clear water. The pups, once listless and frail, grew strong and healthy, their laughter echoing through the halls of the fortress. The pack was no longer living in fear. They were thriving in a new era of peace and prosperity. In the midst of this new beginning, Lyra found herself looking at Thane not as the Alpha King who had saved her, but as her husband, her partner, her mate. He had not just rescued her from her captivity, he had given her a reason to live, a purpose, a family. He had shown her that love was not a weakness, but a power of its own, a force that could heal a broken heart and a dying kingdom. He would find her in the new royal gardens she had cultivated, and they would stand together, watching the sun set over a kingdom that was finally, truly alive. The mate bond, which had once been a source of such pain and sorrow, was now a source of deep, abiding happiness. It was a constant reminder that no matter what horrors they had faced, they had found their way to each other. One evening, Thane took her hand and led her to a small private clearing in the heart of the newly blooming forest. Under the silver light of a full moon, a symbol of their unity, he knelt before her, not as a king to a queen, but as a man to the woman who had saved his soul. "You were brought to me as a last resort," he said, his deep voice filled with emotion. "I saw you as a tool, a solution. I was blind. But you, my love, you saw the man beneath the king. You healed me, not just with your magic, but with your heart. You taught me that true strength isn't about how many we can conquer, but how many we can protect. My kingdom is no longer just my duty. It is our home, our family." He took her hand and gently kissed the back of it, his eyes filled with a devotion that shone brighter than the moon itself. "You didn't just heal our wounds, Lyra. You healed our hearts. The curse is broken, but our love is the true magic." He then, with a love and a tenderness that was the culmination of their entire journey, gently pressed his lips to her neck, right over the mark of their mate bond. A final, definitive claiming. The wolves, black and white, strength and mercy, Alpha and Omega, two halves of a whole, were finally and forever united, their destinies intertwined in a story of love, betrayal, redemption, and a new beginning. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in the heart of a kingdom they had rebuilt together. Lyra and Thane's tale is a testament to the fact that even in a world consumed by darkness, a single act of love can break the most ancient of curses. But theirs is not the only story waiting to be told. Across our lands, countless other souls are still struggling with their own sorrows, searching for a light to guide them out of the shadows. A true member of this new pack never abandons those still lost. By choosing to embrace a love that defied all odds, Lyra and Thane didn't just save their kingdom. They ignited a beacon of hope for every soul who has ever felt rejected, betrayed, or unheard. Their story is a promise that a new dawn will always follow the deepest night. Thank you for journeying with us to witness this beautiful new beginning. If this tale touched your heart, know that the magic it holds lives on, not just in this kingdom, but in every soul who believes in the power of a second chance. May their story echo through the ages and inspire others to find their own light.